Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. We are on episode 46 and in our fourth film of the Frontier Family series with Kelly Reichardt's minimalist anti-Western, revisionist Western, just not a typical Western by any stretch of the imagination, in Meek's Cutoff, the 2010 film, or 2010 film, which starred and really probably is championed by Michelle Williams, and indie spirit actor that keeps finding her way back to these small films that make no money, but they don't care. They make them.
Yeah, exactly.
And but before we get started, I thought it'd be cool. We're going to keep, working on pushing the theme direction of this series. These series, we're learning how to structure them, and Jim's going to he's on a tear on his blog Bava Tuesdays. If you are interested in knowing a bit more about the obsessions of the man, on the screen to my left.
Yeah, exactly. Don't go there. It's not
and
worth
it goes between video games and I still don't understand it. The video game football recaps, which
the AI madness. Yeah, we don't want to get into that. I know, but no. So yeah, I have been really inspired by our Families on the Frontier series so far. We started with The Searchers, then we went back and did Shane, and last week we discussed The New Land, which was a kind of Swedish 70s film, which was kind of the beginning of our revisionism. Well, one of the things that kept on coming up in our discussions, and as I was coming away from these themes, were this kind of concepts of thresholds, right? And the threshold usually being between like the wildness of the space and the West, and then the domesticity of the home. And there's usually someone in that relationship, like a John Wayne in The Searchers, or like an Alan Ladd in Shane, which has to kind of embody the violence. And then by doing that, of the West can never really be at home in the world in which they're kind of laying the groundwork for. So anyway, I play around a lot with that. And then we get to something like The New Land, which is an amazingly beautiful film I never had heard about until we watched it 2 weeks ago. And then we start to think about, like, the actual domestic space is the violent space, and it is the hearted space. And so it kind of almost inverts that whole discussion. And then we come to Meek's Cutoff, which is nice because, in fact, there's never a domestic space to be found in this film. And it kind of, in some ways, turns that theory upside down and inside out, which I like. And as a revisionist history made in 2011, also touted as a feminist kind of take on the Western, it's a really interesting addition to this that kind of forces me to, further kind of extrapolate and think about this kind of dichotomy, because all dichotomies break down, as well as my threshold, domestic, violent, inside out. And this film is really challenging because there's no inside out,
Spinning. You're going to tell us the story here. You're going to make it work. That's why, Jim is someone that I've known for a very long time, in large part through his writing on his blog, and, which is all over the place in lots of wonderful ways. And thankfully for us, he's been writing a lot recently about the Family Pictures podcast. And it does help me to reframe what we're doing. And this idea of violence is so interesting, because this is the anti-violence film ultimately, right? Yeah. It's like, it's the quietude of a woman's ability to deflect, or contort a reflection of a male sense of machoism or violence, and into, no, we have to just not take that as face value, calling BS, like calling bullshit on bro attitudes, if you will, practically, in a modern sense, right? Like, there's this wonderful moment early in the film where the the trapper character who's the guide, Stephen Meek, played wonderfully by Bruce Greenwood, is like waxing poetically about being connected to nature, and and how it's a simple, wonderful life. And it's like, man, this guy's like a 1845 influencer, ready for TikTok to do his speech about his morning routines, and and how he does his cold plunges and in the river nearby before he gets his like coffee from that he methodically grinds for hours. Oh wait, no, he wouldn't do that work. He wouldn't do that.
Can I ask you a question? Based on that character you're talking about, which is Meek, and we'll get into him. Have you ever seen another revisionist Western by Jim Jarmusch, Dead Man?
No, I haven't had an opportunity to watch it.
Definitely check it out. But anyway, there's a character in Dead Man. His name is like Conway Twill, and he's played by Michael Wincott. And this guy, I think, has to be the model for Meek. He talks the same way. He's endless. He goes on and on with his stories. He says the same thing again and again, like, hell is full of bears, or hell is full of this, right? Like, I really love the way she draws that character, and that character kind of becomes a fucking blowhard in the end.
Totally.
And it's brilliant. And you see that also in Dead Man. He did a really good job of that. So there's definitely some indie parallels, even if that's not the model, of some of those kind of blowhard Western,
right.
Gunslingers that I love about this.
And so first off, I mean, I'm glad you're bringing up the idea of independent film here, because unlike the first three films we've done, two of them being US Hollywood mega features, and then like, the New Land being the closest equivalent of a Swedish, like, mega feature,
like a national film, like, everybody give us money, we're making a film.
Yeah. And it was the largest production budget by a Swedish film at the time. This is like out of the 90s independent film movement. It's literally made with hard scratch and paper. And this is where it's interesting to talk about Kelly Reichardt, who was part of the era of the indie moment. In 1994, she has this film, River of Grass, which seems to be like an homage to Badlands, the Terrence Malick film of, like Bonnie and Clyde characters. But it's set in the Florida Everglades, and it did quite well relative to the moment. But unlike Kevin Smith's, who at the same year released Clerks and is like catapulted into, bigger and bigger budgets, she has to wait over 2 decades before she's on to her next feature film. And, and in between, she's part of a wonderful community of filmmakers, and that she contributes to, and she tells this adorable story of like being a PA in her early 20s and on a film, and Ted Hope, who's like the independent producer of Ang Lee films, including Ice Storm, which we covered in this podcast. And, there's so much downtime in movie making. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever been on a film set?
I have. My girlfriend back in the day was a film student at UCLA. And so I went with her on a couple of film sets, and I was like, I never want to go on another film set in my life. It is so boring.
It is. It's so slow. The time is so slow. And she tells a story about being busted by, this producer, Ted Hope, for reading a book during downtime. It's just like, he's like, dude, you gotta just look busy. I know there's nothing to do. And then she has to laugh when she sees the same thing happening on her own sets. Like, she's like, that's such his life, right? And she now teaches film at Bard and in the Hudson Valley, where I am right now, which is kind of cool. I got to make a trip to her office and say like, hey, we did your film on our podcast. Can I say hello?
It's not office hours, sir.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, so her second film, Old Joy, which is basically a story of male friendship reconnecting, two kind of estranged friends as they make their way on a camping trip in the Oregon wilderness, caught the eye of Todd Hayne, who is friends with Michelle Williams, and he gives her this script for her second film, or her third feature, which is Wendy and Lucy, and it's basically a story of a woman who's down on her luck, practically homeless, living with her dog out of her car and trying to make her way to Alaska to find work in a cannery. And Michelle Williams just attaches herself to it and loves the script. And this leads to the first of what become 4 films that she does with Kelly Reichardt. And all of them are in the vein of the classic spirit of a truly small independent film. And this film itself, which was the biggest budget she had done to this date, was still something like under $1 million. And there's even story of how at the very end of the film, they were so strapped for money. And she tells this this moment of how the ending is a concoction of the strained moment where literally everybody was going to head home tomorrow. So they had to stand off to the side with Michelle and what's his name? And maybe it was her producer, and make up what the ending was going to be. Oh, with the Indian, with the man Rondo, who played the Indian, and come up with what they were going to do in these final moments they had while they were in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours from the crappy motel they all stayed in for the production.
So that's,
and I love that. It's like the 90s. It's like, yes.
It's an interesting explanation of the ending, right? Because the ending is somewhat abrupt and you're like, whoa, wait.
Yeah.
I mean, and I understand it. And it really gets to the idea of, the labor of the trip, without the cinema, highs and lows coming in. But, there is something when you see him walking away and it just ends there. You're like, what? Anyway.
Yeah, it's true. And so the film, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is, I read a great review about the ending, which we'll get to, but what's important to know is this is actually based on a true story. And so in 1845, Stephen Meek had been hired to do to lead this group of basically 1,000 immigrants with their 200 wagons through the shortcut he imagined he was going to take them through instead of going along the northern route of the Blue Mountains on the Oregon Trail, which was just everybody kind of imagined. And what's interesting is he had just 2 years earlier been fired for being a bad guy to another group that was part of the original mass migration into the Oregon Territory as part of Manifest Destiny and Polk, and trying to overtake that land of that the British were still trying to occupy before Americans were going to get in there and take over. And so he was already pretty much a failed guide, and this effort to take them through this shortcut, which detoured very southernly, leads to just a disaster of sorts, where they're running out of water as they go through the desert which I never realized Oregon's got desert.
It's up against Nevada in that piece at that lower corner, so it's deserty. Exactly.
And in a nearly month-long journey, because this is a small budget film, so you don't get a true sense of the scale of these migrations. It's reduced to basically a couple oxen in a wagon per householder, and there's like kind of 3 households that remain with Meek. But in reality, there's like thousands of livestock that were going along, and 1,000 horses, and they lose thousands and thousands of cattle in this drive, where they stampede and get lost, and they can't recover them all. And of the 200 wagons that went off, only 56 make it. So the funny thing is, even though the film ends so abruptly, we do know the real story. Technically, they do make it, and Meek many times is almost hanged and or stoned to death. There's one mention of we just got to kill this guy because he sucks so bad.
Well, it's kind of, I have to say, I was really compelled at the beginning of the film when, the women are talking amongst themselves and saying, what do you think they're saying? And one of them, who obviously has these long conversations with her husband, is like, they're deciding whether or not to hang him. There's that sense that from the beginning that Meek is constantly talking himself out of, being killed by, the people who had hired him because, he has failed them so miserably.
Right. And so, yeah, he stands as like this, he's supposed to be the proxy of the Shane or the Ethan, if you will, who's going to protect the family as they, make their way across the West. But he's a buffoon in contrast to Ethan's confidence and whose knowledge that he spouts about the way Indians behave or the way that, the West works. And in that context, in those films, it's true. He's truth speaking effectively. Right. And
Yeah.
similarly, Shane, who's more of a mythologically, necessary evil to allow the settling of the West, who's not such a racist that Ethan was. But in this case, the film is ultimately saying it's like, no, no, no. These guys actually don't know what the fuck they're doing at all.
Yeah, exactly. No one has any idea what they're doing, which I love.
And they're making and it's in contrast the character. So Michelle Williams. So just to kind of set the setting, there's three couples. We have Michelle Williams playing Emily Tetherow and Will Patton, who's Solomon Tetherow, who's a much older husband. Like he's like, you get a sense like this is his second marriage. He's maybe lost his wife and lost his children. We don't know. And we have Millie and Thomas Gately played by Zoe Kazan and Paul Dano. And Paul Dano's just doing his Paul Dano thing. Like, I don't know, man.
Exactly. What should we do, Solomon?
Yeah. And then we have the Whites, which represent the only family with a child in Jimmy White, who also has this wonderful calling bullshit. I guess the women and children know how to call bullshit on Stephen Meek. And, we have Neil Huff as William White, who's probably the most minor character, I would say, of the film. And Shirley Henderson, who's pretty awesome as Glory White. She is another standout in my mind. But what's so interesting is, as you described from the start, it's very clear that men and women live very separate lives. Like the familial structure is gender-based. And it's the men who are off in the distance as observed by the women in the rear, like that are making decisions. And it's so great too, because it's really the women's perspective that's presented. And the men are in the distance like, I don't know. It's like, should we go north or I don't know, south? And it's like, what do you think? I don't know. What do you think?
I really feel like Kelly, I don't know if Kelly Reichardt was doing this intentionally, but it was as if she was channeling through her minimalism, Samuel Beckett. This is like, for me, if Samuel Beckett had made a Western, this is the Western he would have made. People not knowing, language breaking down, they're not being able to communicate. Like, it is a perfect Beckett Western, and I love it for that. I mean, I'm just kind of like putting two and two together, but like, it's as if, the absurdism of the 50s finally caught up with a vision of this kind of revisionist Western. And I think it really works. This idea of it was kind of probably pretty absurd out there with 250 settlers and surrounded by Native Americans who are like, what the fuck are you doing here? And then all the other geopolitical stuff. And they're just in the middle of it, not knowing what the hell to do, where the hell to go.
Yeah, and there's many, many moments where it's just kind of like everybody is, the 10-year-old in the back seat asking each other as if they were a parent, but they're not. They're another 10-year-old. It's like, when are we going to get there? And they're all just like, I don't fucking know, man. They'll be like in a day. Surely a day. Well, if you count a day, if it started tomorrow, it's kind of like that.
It is.
And it is. And so what's so interesting and so there's two kind of contrasting characters. So there's supposedly the person who presents himself as all knowledgeable in Stephen Miller. And he presents this in many, many speeches. Like, it's like he does these moments where, like I've already mentioned one where he's talking about like connection to the land and the way things are supposed to work. And then later, what are some of the other ones?
He talks to I love when he talks to the little boy.
Oh, right. About the mountains and what are their names.
And the mountains. And I'll make you one of the mountains. Like, that he's
I'll talk to the cartographers, son.
exactly. And there
And
is
I'll
both.
have them named Williams Mountains or
and
whatever the fuck.
and when he was doing that, I was both intrigued by like, you know what? That probably could happen if you're one of the first 250 people in Oregon,
I
right?
mean,
Like,
it's so
or
ultimately
settlers in
ironic.
Oregon.
Like this territory, this territory, this passage is named after the buffoon, Meek's Cutoff. Like,
It's
and you get
true.
a sense historically, he is not a well-regarded character. It's like, it's like, oh, let's name this after like Jesterland. Yes, let's name it after the fool.
But the way the movie works, I really like in that, and the more I think about it, the more I like the movie, is that the way it works in that you're introduced to Meek. They have that
Mhm.
discussion where they're like, "What's going on? Where are we going? Should we hang him or not?" But then, like, you'll follow the next day, and Meek will get out, and he's got the Alan Ladd outfit of the gunfighter to the T. So, he's
Yeah,
got that buckskin outfit, got the
correct.
big
With
old
his
beard,
And he's got the Bowie knife
the
hanging
Bowie
from
knife.
his like
So
hip.
he looks the part. Like, there's
Right.
no two questions. But she slowly shows you over the course of this, hour and a half,
Mhm.
that he just becomes, like you're saying, more and more of a buffoon. And where his stories to the young boy about, being stuck in a stuck in a cave between a bear and something else outside where you couldn't go. It was death either way. And then
Yeah.
riding the bear like it was a rodeo, and then taking off his scalp, but still being able to shoot the bear. Like, you're both intrigued, like the kid, like, oh, what a crazy story. And I wonder what the West was like. And also at the same time, like, yeah, maybe he is kind of an idiot. And then slowly,
Yep.
like, it kind of,
Yeah.
and that's really done well in this movie. Like, the
Yeah.
characterization is a slow drip for you to figure out who's who over the course of an hour and a half. And I like that because it's small enough that it can do that well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that slow drip starts with, with Solomon and Emily being the only family, the only couple that actually is presented as conversant, right? You
Yes.
know, the rest of the families, the interactions between, husband and wife are just more just like, I'm freaking out. Stop it. Or,
Yeah.
drink some water. Otherwise you're going to die. It's like, no, I want it for the boy and you. And,
That's
but
right.
Emily and Solomon, there's frankness. And so there is a glimpse of respect there, where Solomon is this character who in a funny way evokes a little bit of what's his name? Oscar. I'm blanking. He has the two first names name, which I'm blanking on.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Carl Carl
Carl Oscar.
Carl Oscar.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Oscar Carl. I think it's Oscar
No, it's
Carl.
Carl Oscar. You're right.
It's Carl Oscar. And Carl Oscar had this, projected this positivity. And Solomon does the same, but he's not a man of action necessarily at the same time. He's a persistent man, and he calls for calm, but he doesn't question when he should, which is what Carl Oscar also did. And that's, I think, the parallel between Carl Oscar and Emily is quite interesting ultimately, because Carl Oscar was this patient, persistent person who just kept moving forward, but he also questioned, right? He questioned like, well, I'd rather have a barn than a church. I think that's a much more practical next step here, and also he also stands up to in small little ways, the way that he stood up to the over religious neighbors that were trying to persecute uh, uh, his wife's good friend for marrying a Baptist. And he's like, whoa, 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 let's chill out here. She's just making her way like all of us. And so Emily is that, and that's what's missing from Solomon, and is absorbed by Emily through her. Just like, is he just dumb, or is he like, duping us? It's like, I can't quite tell,
Yeah.
and that's the beginnings of this. Like, I can't tell if he's stupid or is he just, incompetent. I'm sorry, that's both the same thing. Is he stupid or is he trying to like trick us? And she's trying to sort out his intentions.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because her all of the women have a certain amount, except for the one who constantly plays with the bird. She seems checked out entirely. Paul
Oh,
Dano's, I forget her
that's
name.
That's Glory. Yeah.
So
No, no, no.
she's
Sorry, that's Millie. That's Millie.
Millie's
Right.
kind
That's
of always a
Paul
little
Dano's
checked out.
character's wife. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's the one who She's the only one who really kind of starts to freak out. Right.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
And she doesn't have much to say otherwise, too.
No.
But the other two are in conversation. And there's one time when they're all getting up and they're the first ones to get up in the morning. And I think it's White who comments, and she's the one who's pregnant, that, we're doing, N-word work, right? Like we're sitting
Oh,
here
right.
and it
Yeah.
was like, whoa, like from the beginning, like this movie
Yeah.
was not trying to erase, the kind of the sharp, moment of, racism that comes up in
Yeah.
this movie again and
Mhm.
again. And it wasn't just the bad Meek who was racist, right? That was a trend throughout everybody, seemingly
Right.
to some degree. And again, that was very realistic. But when they were talking about Meek, the women from almost seemingly the get go were like, this guy's an idiot. Like, we need to take, like, they almost saw it already. Like, we need to take action here. Like,
Yeah.
this ship is going in the wrong direction. And that's
Mhm.
interesting because how many of them felt comfortable to actually say that? And it wasn't really their role to do it, became apparent. And to your point, Emily is the only one who seemed to have any influence in that conversation and relationship. But it's not like you trusted the husbands at all either. So, like, it was
No.
this weird thing. Like, they were almost at Meeks' disposal, no matter given where they were, right, and what situation they were up against.
At first, they truly are, and the way that the men are at the distance and the women are listening, talking about like, should we just kill him and just keep going? And the way that Meek at some point literally intervenes with his swagger to say like, "Yay, you guys talking about killing me? That's not a good idea." Basically. But in contrast, when Meek tries to pull this kind of, you know, forcing himself and steering the conversation with Emily, where he says, "Hey, do you dislike me?" Emily's character's obliqueness is so clever. Like, it's like, I don't dislike you, I dislike the situation, which
Yeah.
is such a great representation of women managing male, trying to dominate situations. And it changes throughout the film. And first,
Yeah.
it's through obliqueness. It's like this, I'm not going to let you have power through accepting what you're saying. And that's what's so important here. It's like Emily does not accept his like story at all. And as you mentioned, some of the other women are kind of generally by Emily's side. But this is something that slowly steers as he gets into this other story. He's telling this story about, and it's so disgusting. It's like telling the story of, this is after they've captured the Indian, and he's trying to monologue about like their ways and what they're like. And he tells this disgusting story of being with a troop of other trappers or something and
Oh,
coming across Blackfeet and basically shooting them literally like ducks in a pond as they were unarmed and tried to escape this posse, and just waiting for them to pop up and shoot them. And he also talks about this moment of, well, if there's going to be blood, Meek's going to be there. And it reminded me of like the Jessup character from A Few Good Men, and this like, you need me on that wall, you want me on that wall, like I'm here to do the ugly violence that you need.
yeah.
And she just simply calls it vanity for what it is.
Yeah.
Like, you're imagining yourself as this hero who's going to save us, and that's just bullshit.
And there was also, I mean, about that kind of storytelling that Meek was doing when he was telling that really, like you said, horrid story about the Blackfeet, and they were unarmed. So they were literally, when they came up from air, just shooting them in the river, and it was just
Right.
a game to them. He was looking for their response. And if they were going to laugh and be like, oh, wow, that's great, or where they weren't. And when they
Mm-hmm.
finally were like, you're kind of an idiot, he's like, it's not like I really liked what I did, but I did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Mm-hmm.
he's always kind of trying to kind of reframe himself and connect with them. And in that regard, he was a really well drawn character because you could see like despite the fact him being an idiot, despite all of that, like, could you imagine being one of those people out there in the middle of nowhere, and they show the
Oh, yeah.
toil of like of making the food and of cleaning the dishes and stuff. But here's a person, right, who's gonna like basically go out in the middle of nowhere. We saw this kind of in uh in the new land when the brother
Oh,
Robert
yeah.
goes out and does that, and you see like these characters, like what does it make? And in that regard, Meek is equally interesting to me, but then
Yeah.
ultimately he becomes more of like the leadership we're used to in this day and age of just complete idiocy and having no ideas. But like the fact that he was on the on the frontier makes him that much more interesting, at least, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, that character was played very well and really was a compelling one. I have to say, of all of them, he was, in my mind, the best drawn and the most interesting.
Mhm. And so the first real, because what's so interesting about, like you've already alluded to, this kind of minimalist storytelling that is characteristic of Reichardt Kelly's filmmaking. The first arc that actually happened is the introduction of the Indian, and I almost, and we can call him a Native man. I think in this case, like, he is the Indian because that's literally how he's described in the film and also credited in the film, and it's played by Rondeau, who was, I just a little bit from his Wikipedia. He's like a citizen of the Crow tribe and of Cheyenne descent, and he was like a rodeo cowboy, which
Yeah.
is awesome. Like that, he grew up as, and that led to him. He fell into being a stuntman on a couple films. The first one I think was Crazy Horse, and then he just falls into few acting roles and becomes this wonderful character and portrait of this, the kind of the classic, the what's the best way to describe it, I think, is the I had my notes here. Wait. The kind of, the unreadable other, right? It's like he's this indigenous presence that they don't know what to do with, and that's what he originally shows up with. They've gone to the cutoff, the quote unquote shortcut south of the Oregon Trail along the Blue Mountains, to avoid Native Americans and the threat of attack. But he kind of shows up. He's an apparition at first, right? It's like, did I see that? And then he literally pops up in front at Emily's feet while she's yet again gathering work and wood and doing women's work. And she immediately drops wood, takes off, and goes into this moment where she just fires the old facet musket that needs the reload that takes a good 15 seconds, but she does it so diligently
Yeah.
to announce, like, there's an invader, in a sense, or there's an unknown that needs to be dealt with, to bring the men back who have gone off to look for water.
Yeah, she's very capable, and you see that right away. And that's great. But like the thing to me with all of the folks as they're walking, and as we come to the unknowable and the other, the kind of un, inability to understand him, which again is very, for me,
Yeah.
Beckett. But all of the characters as they're walking and as they're kind of moving through space, and that's what the first part of the movie is like, basically
Mhm.
first 30 minutes is just them moving through space,
Yeah.
following their thing. And they're like, their old school hats are covering their
Yeah. The
faces.
planets.
You don't even
Yeah.
know it's Paul Dano for like 20 minutes till you finally
Uh-huh.
see his face. Like,
Mhm.
there's just this sense that like they're all just going through space, and there is no relax, there is no real conversation, there is no plot. It's just
No.
movement, right?
Yeah.
And I really do like that. So at the point where you come to this point where you start to have something developing as a plot, right? Like, here is this Indian and they can't speak or necessarily, and they go back and capture, we could talk about that, but like you finally think like, okay, now something's going to happen in this film. Like, here we are finally at a point after 30 minutes of walking where something's going to develop. Now, how does it go?
And the funny thing is, it's like barely anything happens. Something happens, but barely. And
Like,
you're right. Like, I think, I mean, just to back up, as you're suggesting we do, so much of this is about the monotony of like simple labor, and this is not unlike the new land, right?
yes.
Where where there's the new land has this obsession of work through these many close-ups of hands like working tools and bread and gathering water and cracking through ice to gather water because they're at the frozen lakes of Minnesota. This is quite similar in a lot of ways, but majority though, like unlike Oscar, I'm blanking on the stupid
Carl
two namer,
Oscar.
Carl Oscar, who's a part of that labor. The labor here is generally presented as women's work, while the men like sort through what do we do next haphazardly and terribly. You
And
already
mind
alluded
the
to,
oxen, kind of like
yeah,
Carl Oscar too. There's that
right,
physical work, it seems, at least of strength of minding an oxen and bringing them on, because
right,
it seems
yeah,
somewhat of a difficult job, not one I'd want to
yeah.
be doing in the middle of a desert.
No, no, and the actors did speak of in some of the interviews that I read, like it was not a fun, it was not a fun day on set. It was hot. There was real labor. There were people going to the hospital with like some heat exhaustion.
Oh
It
yeah.
happened. But anyway, and there was like no budget. It's not like you had your nice air conditioned truck, nearby.
Here's my
I'm getting
Star Wars wagon, right?
But you're right, like that it was just endless packing and unpacking, setting and clearing
Wow.
fires, and just sitting off in the distance while the men are making, decisions supposedly and literally voting. And there's like one scene where the men vote on whether they should follow the Indian or not, I think, which comes up.
Yeah.
And they're just standing there staring. And it doesn't, it's not like it's as, you're right, it's not dramatic, even though it is this shock to the plot, if you will, or this routine when he arrives, and it's announced with Emily's two successive shots from a flint musket. It's less of threat and more of like this mirror of this, like, what are we doing here? What kind of
Yeah.
assumptions are we making about this trip? Is this going to turn out all right? And this is where they start to really dig into, like, how is this going to play out for us if we don't make some changes? And this is where Emily's character starts using the Indian as a lever, because she's not, presented as like, I'm going to, in this kind of romantic way. And I don't mean like romance, but like presumption of melodrama, like she's going to make this connection with this
Yeah.
man.
It wasn't Dances with Wolves, right?
No, right. And instead, but she is the one who's like willing to try to make a connection, where Meek is like, let's just kill the fucker, right?
Yeah. He wants to. It's almost like that's his, he's like, we can't keep him around. We'll all wake up scalped. You have no
Yeah.
idea what these people are doing. Where, like he goes on that whole, and obviously, her husband, uh Solomon is like, wait a second. You haven't gotten us anywhere. Let's see what he may or may not know. And so
Yeah.
there's a little bit of like, at this point, anything is a possibility, because Meek is leading them, off the face of the earth with no sign
Right.
of anything. And I think it's interesting because once they actually go and capture him, he
Mhm.
spends all of this time talking to them, and he's not afraid of them. He's not really even concerned by them. He's kind of aloof and like, you fucking stupid white people, like, like that's what they say in Dead Man, stupid fucking white man, right? Like there's that whole sense where there's a similar Native American character actually too, but he speaks perfect English because he went to England and learned how to speak English by reading William Blake of all people. But that's another story. But anyway, this guy can't talk. And so
No.
he's like in a situation where Meek's about to kill him. They finally do save them, and he just goes about his business. Whether he would get killed or not, it didn't matter to him. He's a really interesting kind of, and the way he talks vehemently at certain times, like you, and you have no idea what he's saying, and you really feel that
Yeah.
alienation. And I think
Right.
that's another powerful piece. There's nothing beneath that saying and bailing you out and letting you know if he's
Nope.
a good character or a bad character.
Right.
You can't read his intention at all. He's a perfect
None.
poker face. And so
Mhm.
you're in this situation where you're really like the settlers. Like you have no idea what to do in this space. You feel as lost as them.
Yeah, you can't, you don't know whether to trust or fear him or make sense of. But Emily decides that we have to still make choices, right? Even though, and she does it with a sense of doubt, which is unlike Meek, who's like, I know this guy's going to kill us. We have to kill him first.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't not know that. It's like that classic double entendre. I don't. You could be right, is basically what she's saying, but not saying that. Not willing to indulge in this. Like, let's just go to violence. Let's I think it's important because Solomon gives the opening for Emily ultimately, as you suggest in the beginning. Like, he's like, whoa, cool your jets, let's not kill him. We got to take whatever advantages that might be presented. He's obviously alone. He probably must know the land, so that means he probably must know water. So that's the practicality of it. But the how to do it, is through Emily. She's, in a little bit of Paul Dano's character, as he's the one who's like makes the claim of, here, I'll give you, he's made a transaction and said, like, the way it's capitalism. It's like, I'll give him a blanket, he'll bring
Yeah,
us to water,
that's right.
which is spoken by, the Thomas character, Thomas Gately. But that turns out to be not so true. I mean, though he does keep the blanket, he's like, sure, yeah, I'll use that, that's great. But it's really through Emily's kind of small, persistent actions that they, builds this rapport that, like we say, we don't know where it's going to lead. And there's, I do like Meek's line of like blood or water, right? Or what are we headed towards? It's such a
Yeah.
great, it's a
And
great, and it leads to the line that I said, don't think you ain't wagering, which is probably that, if there is a pinnacle of this movie, it's the standoff, and which we'll get to. But she makes like this moment. There's this one great moment. She's tried to deliver him food once before, and he accepts it, but it rejects it at the same time, which is so awesome. I love how he takes bites, but the last bite he spits out in her face, basically.
yeah,
You know, and then later on, she does so again while he's, drawing some artwork on one of the outcroppings of rocks, and she notices his boot could use a repair. And so she is able to communicate with him, like, give that to me, I'll fix it. And so she goes to fix it. And the Indian at one point tries to stop her, and she's like, hey, chill out, man. I'm actually going to fix this. Okay.
yeah,
And she does, but she announces to, I think it's Holly. Was it Holly? Millie. Yeah, it was to Millie that I'm not doing this, for the sake of being a good person. I'm doing this to try to get something from him. Like,
yeah.
maybe it's trust. Maybe it's like, he won't kill me because I've actually, done something.
Yeah, but she's also trying to step over that unknowableness seemingly.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
there's a moment where they all seem, and it's a strange moment. So, the white father, right? So the one who's the father of the son, and
Oh, right. Yeah. That's Glory. Oh, no,
he's
sorry. That's William, because the son is Jimmy.
yep. So William stops drinking, gets sick, falls down, and they all come around him. They're
Mhm.
like, "Oh, what's going on?" And then Indian comes up and starts
Yeah.
speaking over him and starts
Mhm.
obviously doing some sort of incantation to kind of, maybe wish him well. Who knows? You don't know. That's why you're like them. And like them, you're sitting there looking at them, being like, well, I don't know what he's saying. I don't know if it's good or bad, but hopefully something good comes out of this because everything has been a shit show. And,
Yeah.
Meek is sitting over there thinking, like, this savage, I just should shoot him right now. I should just shoot him right now. But, like, there's that constant tension when he has come into the scene, which is really, again, it's a subtle tension, but it's
Mhm.
real and it's believable because of the whole linguistic problem and because of the cultural differences and everything else. Like, you really get a sense, like, they're, even if they're, many of them are kind of like, you know, pearl clutching when it comes to the Indian, when it comes to him being able to give them something, given that they feel like they have no real alternative and do not know where they are, they're open to it. And I find that an interesting twist, right? They're not like, get away from my husband or stop doing that with your
Right.
gibberish. Like, they're like, they let him do it and then they go back
Yeah.
to worrying.
Yeah. I think as a viewer and reader of the film, you do get a sense that he's trying to be a positive influence in that moment.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm a human being. This person is dying potentially, and we need to respect their humanity in the moment, maybe before they pass on to the next life. And you get a sense that they maybe even sense that too, which is kind of probably one of the most humanizing moments with the Indian in the entire film. And so, but before that moment happens, we do get to this culminating moment of the failure of like the men's influence in like decision making, where they're begrudgingly following the Indian, and they come to this spot, which is this ravine that's this really steep space, and they have to get the wagons down, and they concoct this plan to just lower them one at a time with a tow line, and it's almost comical, as they just lower one of these wagons, and it's like squeaking, and there's like the tin pots pinging, and the sound design of this film is really interesting that way. There's all these like extraneous like the sounds of life, and how almost silly it is, like because what they're doing is so absurd, in the way that they've been traveling. And sadly, it turns out to be the Tetheros, Emily and Solomon's. They lose it, and it just crashes to the bottom of the hill, which leads to the standoff, which is really important because, Emily's just kind of moving through their belongings and picking out what they could possibly salvage. And interestingly enough, she's allowing the Indian to do the same. It's like, good on you. You find something you want, take it, because we can't take it all anymore. And this sets off Meek. He's like, get away from that. Get away from that. And he draws his pistol to execute him in that moment. And this is where Emily makes her stand, finally, in the kind of closest thing to kind of Western violence we're going to get in this film, where she raises it. We know she knows how to operate this rifle, as we saw earlier, and points it right at Stephen Meek. And their dialogue is probably what's most interesting in this moment, because this is where she just makes clear, and I'm gonna have to find it, here it is. He's like trying to tell him, we have to kill him, like, because they're imagining, and even Emily is trying to buy into this moment, like just over the next ridge is going to be water. And Meek keeps saying, like, just over the next ridge might be an entire settlement waiting to kill us. And he's trying to say, you have no idea what you're dealing with. And she's just like, well, neither do you, motherfucker. That's my addition, right?
You proved that amply by now.
Yeah, that's her version of motherfucker. That's Western motherfucker.
Exactly.
And then he just continues, well, maybe you, and I like, this is like classic Western style language. Like, it's like a face-off, like classic, because it's literally a face-off. It's like a Quentin Tarantino, it's not three guns surround, everyone's pointing at one another. It's two guns, because the Indian's unarmed. But the dialogue is classic Western standoff. And it's like, well, maybe you'd like to wager water or blood. And, and she just says, I'd rather just leave the wagering to stupid men like you. It's like, fuck off. That's like, just cut it out. She's just basically endlessly saying, stop telling me you know what's going on, because you don't.
Yeah. No, it's well done again, and very subtle in that she doesn't play his game,
No.
But she does ultimately have to use force or the threat of force to save the Indian, because that's all men like him will respond to ultimately.
Right. And he does surrender. And so we're not given the weapons are never fired. And, in a review I read it, I think it's so clever, because he talks so much about this as being like, you don't even know what cards you're holding, ma'am, and it's like, you don't, and that's what the episode is like, don't think you ain't wagering, right? This kind of language. And this reviewer, I'm forgetting his name, he so cleverly made this connection. It's like, she doesn't win the wager, she just gets him to fold, and I was like, that's so true.
It's true.
It's like, and this to me, I think what's so lovely about this is such a modern perspective on how women in power, and this is something that I think about, with my wife who runs an organization and navigates raising money through, wealthy benefactors, which are principally men who know everything because they're so wealthy. And like the way that she quietly but persistently works and works and works and just wins the argument, if you will, or wins the direction of the organization, because they get tired of their own narratives. Ultimately, when they see it actually takes work to persist and to win the argument, they give up because they rather just be blowhards than actually do the work. And it's that quiet continual influence. And she doesn't, I always think of this as it's like this idea of leadership where you don't, because there's many narratives in fiction and others, and there's bad Western narratives like The Quick and the Dead, where I think it's a Sharon Stone character who becomes a gunfighter. Like she
Yeah.
wins by becoming like a man, right? And she becomes loud and full of violence. And I don't think, as many times as my wife has told me, as soon as a woman starts being loud, they're told to like they're hysterical,
Yeah.
right? And if she gets loud like a man, they'll just say like you're being hysterical. And so that's what I think is such a great portrait in this film, is like this is what women in leadership looks like, is through it's not like she's not being strong. You're right. She does have to raise the gun, but she has to do it through manipulation, which is in
Yeah.
cleverly so.
And she doesn't have to fire it. So
No,
there is that too, right? So that probably
exactly.
could be an issue for her if she were, but she was ready to. But yeah, I mean, and just it's a great hold up. But to the point, like the whole idea is it shouldn't be called Meek's Cutoff. It should be called Meek's Bluff, right?
Yeah.
Because he's bluffing them the whole time, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just this whole card metaphor is right. Like she makes him fold, but like, he's just bluffing. Like everything is just chest. He's blowing up his chest to make sure everyone knows what a badass he is or how great he is. And,
Uh-huh.
there's no there.
Yeah, and it comes out in the end, because you talk about how you mentioned how the what's his name, not William but the father of William, they're back on the trail and following the Indian, and they finally come across a tree, but right before that he falls, and you get a sense like he's dying, and he's lying in the back of his wagon as they arrive, and they're like, a tree, that means there must be water nearby, right? Like it's like it can't live in a desert if there isn't water. And so there is this moment of hope, and then it's back to, oh God, what do we do, right? And so you're
Yeah,
in
exactly.
the entire film prior to this moment, the men would go to the side with Meek, and they would decide, and the women would have to listen and wait. But this is also the first time I noticed uh, um, Emily's character is not wearing her bonnet,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
It happens to be slightly overcast to allow this, so she's not being beaten down by the sun. But Michelle Williams, we see in full, Michelle Williams as like beautiful actress and with confidence now. And this is where finally he relents. Like he just mumbles, like, I'm doing whatever, I'm following Solomon and Mrs. Meek,
Yeah.
Mrs. not Mrs. Meek, Mrs. Tetherow.
And
It's
she's
like, whatever.
basically the deciding person now, right?
Correct.
Everybody's
Yeah.
kind of following her now.
Exactly. And then and what is she following? Her hope that it's not blood, it's water,
Yeah.
and she looks through the tree. And this is the awkward ending that they must have they
So
negotiated
yeah,
by a trailer.
let me just set this up for the listening audience. You go an hour and a half. There's been the one bit of action we talked about. A couple of wagons go down a mountain. One gets broken. And then there's a standoff with a gun. This is a Western, by the way. And then they continue on. No shots were fired. They
Yep.
continue on. And now you're like, oh, the Native American Indian is walking ahead and they're at this crossroads. Do we go back where we came from or do we keep following him? And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. The movie
Yeah.
ends.
And
There
so,
was a moment for me like this really is like Beckett. Like they don't give you anything. Like it's the world is like there is no world outside of their kind of play of language and minimal loss. It's
mhm.
strange. I mean, strange film in that regard, and good
Well, I
in
mean,
that regard.
well, in a sense, like you could see from her perspective, from Reichardt's perspective, the story is over because the exchange of power has happened. Like
Yeah,
that's the end point, right? We have Emily, who's
sure.
clearly leaders, like I'm the captain now, but not in that way. She's not going to say that. She's the leading, but she's leading through hope by looking out at the Indian. And and that's I think the interesting anti-feminist Western moment of this thing is like, we're not going to get this grand, does he lead us into death, or does he lead us into this nice mythological resolution? We found water, we're saved. We don't get
Yeah,
that kind of resolution. We're not going to get that satisfying ending that we usually aspire to have, whether it be blood or water. No, it's like, no, the ending is the exchange of leadership, and it's shifted from the blowhard. And I love this, like he described it, and I agree with this. To because it's not only is it this feminist leader, he described it as a femme. She's in pink, right? It's the beautiful, Michelle
yeah,
Williams,
yeah.
and it's like, so it goes from the blowhard to the woman in the pink dress, and that's so fucking cool. You know what I mean?
It's
And
true.
she's just, she has clarity in her decision, even though she has doubts, and she speaks clearly that there is doubt in my decision. I am not saying absolutely this is right, but this is the hand we have, and we need to play it out, right?
Yeah.
There is no folding, people. There
No,
is no
it's true.
turning back.
Now, and I loved with the pink dress. It's a good point. I love at certain points as they were walking, like one of the details you hold on to is how filthy the dresses have gotten, or
Yeah.
how filthy parts of them are at any given time. And that was true of the new land too. You start to see where they had cuts and stuff on their bodies and just things that would kind of, accumulate that other westerns you wouldn't see. Alan Ladd looks like he came out of a, cigarette commercial. He looks so great. Yeah. Whereas a lot of like in the new land and in these, like people kind of look fucked up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and the same thing with the new. Yeah, and I think that's part of the revisionist Western. And I think we have one more film to go, and
Yeah. Looking
uh,
forward to it.
yeah, and so, but what's so great about like Meek's Cutoff, like to kind of little synthesize, it's like we had Shane, it's like the male protector, against violence, and then the Searchers, we have Ethan, who's the avenger, right, against violence, and then we have the new land, where it's like it's domestic endurance, but now it's like, no, 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 did men even deserve to be leaders of the frontier at all? We're just a bunch of
Yeah.
bumblers in the first place.
Yeah. And Newland was a nice bridge for that because
Yeah,
Liv Ullman's character, Christina, was so amazing and was
yeah,
was doing so much that labor became so apparent and the woman's
right.
role became apparent. But obviously in Meek's Cutoff, you have that switch, right? Like you're able
Mhm.
now to kind of switch the roles, right? And
Right.
that's the real dream and that's the real hope. And so it's not so much about what historically may have happened, but where we are now. And that whole like thing we talked about in the 70s, right? With how much those, horror movies told us about where we are. I mean, obviously revisionist Westerns are doing so much of that work. And so for
Mhm.
that, it's super interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's another one, Jim. Look at us. We keep going every week.
Put it in the can, Michael. It's done.